You don't even deserve the title of mother, the old woman muttered. And if you recognize your own mother in Dorothy's story, maybe tonight you'll finally pick up the phone and call her. Dorothy came into this world in 1952 in Birmingham, Alabama, a place and a time where being black and poor meant society had already written your value before your first breath. Her father pulled endless double shifts at the steel mill until the dust and smoke stole the strength from his lungs. Her mother scrubbed strangers' houses until her knees bent under the weight of someone else's dirt. From the start, Dorothy understood. Love required sacrifice, and sacrifice was the only way to survive. At 17, Dorothy carried her first child, Jamar. The moment the young man heard she was pregnant, he disappeared, gone like smoke carried off by the wind. 2 years later, Derisha arrived. By the age of 19, Dorothy was standing alone, with two babies in her arms, no husband at her side, and bills that only seemed to grow larger. But Dorothy Dion was built from something tougher than circumstance. Dorothy took a night job cleaning office buildings, walking nearly 4 miles each way, because paying bus fare meant less milk for her children. By daylight, she looked after other people's kids, while her own sat quietly in the corner, already learning that childhood would have to wait. But before I continue, I want to ask you for a small favor. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and drop your country in the comments. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Thank you. Now picture Dorothy, a woman barely 5 feet tall, with hands that never seemed to stop moving. She rose every morning at 4 a.m., fixing breakfast for her babies before heading out to scrub those offices. By 7 a.m., she'd be back, making sure Jamar and Derisha were ready for school, their clothes pressed and pressed, even if they came from the church's donation box. "Mama, why can't we have new shoes like the other kids?" 6-year-old Derisha asked one morning, staring down at sneakers held together with duct tape and a little bit of prayer. Dorothy knelt beside her daughter and looked her straight in the eyes. "Baby girl, new shoes won't make you run faster or jump higher. What matters is where your feet carry you and how you walk that road." Then with a black marker, she drew tiny flowers across those worn-out sneakers. "Now you've got the prettiest shoes in the whole school." That was Dorothy Dion, a woman who could turn nothing into something, sorrow into laughter, shame into pride. When Jamar turned 8, the teasing at school began. His classmates laughed because his lunchbox always held peanut butter sandwiches, while the other kids showed off with meals that looked fancy and full. He stormed into their tiny apartment, tossing his backpack across the floor. "I hate being poor, Mama. I hate that we don't have nice things." Dorothy set down the shirt she was mending and wrapped her arms around her son. "Jamar," she said gently, "let me tell you something my own mama once told me. Rich folks might have money, but we have each other. And when a family truly loves one another, that's a kind of wealth no bank could ever hold." But Jamar was still too young to understand a richness that couldn't be measured in dollars. Dorothy kept pushing herself past exhaustion, scrubbing offices through the night, taking in laundry during the day, and on weekends, braiding hair in her tiny living room for $5 a head. She'd fall asleep right there at the kitchen table, her head resting on top of a math worksheet she was helping solve. Because to Dorothy, education was the one gift that could rewrite a child's future. Winters were the cruelest. Their apartment walls were paper thin, and the heater only worked when it felt like showing mercy. Dorothy piled every blanket they owned onto her children's bed, then curled up on the living room couch with nothing but her old coat to keep warm. She'd tell the kids she liked sleeping there, but the truth was she wanted to make sure. But Dorothy had a vision the world couldn't see. Every extra dollar she earned went straight into a coffee tin, tucked carefully behind a fake flower in the kitchen cabinet. "Education money," she whispered each time she slipped in wrinkled bills and loose change. When Jamar was accepted into the school's gifted program, Dorothy wept, not from sorrow, but from joy. For the first time, she saw her sacrifices beginning to bloom into possibility. And when Deresia made the honor roll 3 years in a row, Dorothy pushed herself through extra shifts just so she could surprise her daughter with a second-hand typewriter from the thrift store. Often as she braided Daricia's hair or sat beside Jamar helping with his math homework, Dorothy would say, "One day you're going to be something special in this world. And when that day comes, the only thing I ask is, don't forget your mama." High school brought new challenges. Jamar dreamed of playing basketball, but the gear and team fees were far beyond their reach. So Dorothy added yet another burden to her shoulders, taking a third job, scrubbing the homes of wealthy families on Saturdays, wealthy families across town. She scrubbed their toilets, mopped their polished floors, all while their children played with toys worth more than Dorothy earned in an entire month. One Saturday, she was on her knees cleaning the bathroom of a particularly demanding woman who trailed behind her, pointing out imaginary spots Dorothy had missed. Just then, the woman's teenage son strolled by and sneered, "Mom, why is the maid using our bathroom? Can't she just use the one in the garage?" Dorothy's hands froze around the toilet brush. For a split second, she wanted to rise up and tell that boy exactly what she thought of his arrogance. But instead, she swallowed the words, took a slow breath, and kept scrubbing. She needed that paycheck for Jamar's basketball shoes. That night, Dorothy dragged herself home, weary and bitter. From down the hall, she heard Jamar's muffled sobs. She tapped gently on his door. "What's wrong, baby?" Through tears, he whispered, "Mama, I see how hard you work. You leave before the sun comes up and don't get home until it's dark. I don't need basketball shoes. I don't need to play sports. I just need you not to work so hard." Dorothy set aside the shirt she was stitching, and wrapped her 15-year-old son tightly in her arms. "Jamar, listen to me. Every hour I work, every floor I scrub, every dish I wash, it's not suffering, it's investment. Baby, I'm not just surviving, I'm building. I'm building a bridge so you can walk across struggles I had to swim through." That very night, Dorothy reached for the coffee tin. Over the years, it had grown heavy, packed with sacrifice, loose change, and whispered prayers. She counted out just enough to buy Jamar's basketball gear. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she was smiling through every one of them. Darisia, though, was different from her brother. Where Jamar burned with fire and passion, Darisia was made of still waters and quiet reflection. She could spend endless hours at the library, not just because it held books, but because it held warmth in the winter and the cool blessing of air conditioning in the summer. She'd return home brimming with stories about college, careers and possibilities that seemed as far away as the moon. "Mama," 13-year-old Darisia said one evening, as Dorothy rubbed her aching feet after another 18-hour shift, "when I grow up, I'm going to buy you a big house so you never have to work again." Dorothy smiled softly. "Baby girl, just promise me you'll remember where you came from. Success, it can change people, makes them forget the hands that lifted them up. I could never forget you, Mama. Never." But Dorothy had seen enough of life to know. Childhood promises don't always survive the weight of adult ambition. The years rolled forward in a blur of work, sacrifice, and small victories. Jamar graduated high school with a basketball scholarship to a respectable college. Deracia earned a full academic scholarship to a university 3 states away. Dorothy stood at both graduations, tears streaming down her face, wearing the same modest church dress she had worn for 5 years. But in her heart, she felt like the wealthiest woman alive. "This is it, Mama," Jamar whispered as he hugged her tight after the ceremony. "This is where everything changes for our family." Dorothy nodded, believing every word. College broke the first real separation. Suddenly, the apartment that once felt too cramped for three now felt endless with just Dorothy inside. The silence pressed heavy after years of children's laughter, late-night homework, and dreams once shared over bowls of beans and rice. At first, Jamar called home every week, then every other week, then just once a month. His voice shifted over those 4 years, becoming smoother, more polished, and somehow more distant. He spoke about fraternity brothers, internships, networking events, but he stopped talking about coming home for breaks. Darcy, sweet, thoughtful Darcy, began with letters, long, beautiful letters about her classes, her professors, and the new friends she was making. Dorothy read each one until the paper grew soft from her touch, tucking them carefully into a shoebox beneath her bed. But the letters grew shorter, then they became phone calls, and eventually just text messages, cold little words on a glowing screen that Dorothy struggled to understand. When Jamar graduated college, Dorothy emptied the last of her savings to buy a Greyhound bus ticket. At the wedding reception, Jamar and his new wife sat proudly with their wedding party, laughter and champagne filling the room. Dorothy, clutching a small gift bag she could barely afford, walked over to her son. "Congratulations, baby," she whispered, bending down to hug him. Jamar stood stiff, giving her nothing more than a quick pat on the back. "Thanks for coming, Ma. I hope you're enjoying yourself." Before Dorothy could answer, his new mother-in-law turned, her diamond necklace catching the light. With a polite smile that never reached her eyes, she asked, "Jamar, darling, who is this?" The silence felt endless. Dorothy's heart pounded in her chest as her son cleared his throat. "This is Dorothy, my mother." "Oh," the woman replied, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How nice that you could make it." Dorothy forced a smile, though her hands trembled as she clutched the strap of her worn purse. She spent the rest of the night seated at a lonely table near the back, watching her son laugh, dance, and celebrate with his new family as though she were invisible. She slipped out quietly during the cake cutting, boarding another long bus home. The street lights blurred through her tears, each mile pulling her further from the boy she had once carried on her hip and closer to a silence she could no longer bear. Dorothy's daughter had always been the gentle one, the child who seemed to notice every sacrifice, every late night, every extra shift. If anyone would remember, Dorothy believed, it would be her. For a while she was right. Duresia became a social worker, married a kind man named David, and moved into a cozy middle-class neighborhood. Soon came two children, Dorothy's very first grandchildren. For weeks, Dorothy saved what little she could. She knitted tiny blankets late into the night and bought toys from the discount store, her hands aching but her heart full. When the day finally came, she took the bus to Charlotte, nerves and excitement battling inside her chest. The visit began like a dream. The children were beautiful, wide-eyed, giggling, so full of life. Dorothy's heart swelled as she cradled her granddaughter, humming the same lullaby she'd once sung to Duresia. She played peekaboo with her grandson until his laughter filled the room. For the first time in years, she felt needed again. But cracks soon began to show. At dinner one evening, David's eyes flicked over Dorothy's faded dress and the way she carefully cut her food. He smirked. "Honey," he whispered to Duresia, though not quietly enough, "your mama's country ways are showing." It's kind of embarrassing, don't you think? The words sliced through Dorothy like glass. She pretended not to hear, keeping her smile fixed for the children's sake, but inside shame burned hotter than any fire. Later, as she packed her small bag for the return bus, Duretia hugged her and whispered, "Mama, you know I love you." Dorothy kissed her daughter's cheek, forcing her voice steady. "Of course, baby girl. Don't you worry about me." But on the long ride home, staring out the window at miles of dark highway, Dorothy realized something she had never wanted to admit. Even the daughter who once promised to never forget was slipping away. David's words landed like stones. "Maybe you should talk to your mother about updating her wardrobe. The neighbors might get the wrong impression about our family." Dorothy kept stirring the pot as if she hadn't heard, though her ears burned. She had saved for weeks to buy this dress. She'd even gone to a beauty shop and spent money she didn't have just to look presentable for her daughter's new life. But the breaking point came on Sunday. Wanting to give something of herself, Dorothy offered to cook. She rose early, humming softly as she prepared the dishes that had carried her family through years of hunger and hard times. Golden cornbread, tender collard greens, crispy fried chicken seasoned with love. When the food was set on the table, she waited nervously for her daughter's smile. Instead, David frowned after his first bite. "This is awfully heavy, Dorothy. We usually eat healthier than this. All this grease and salt, it's not good for the children." The room went quiet. Dorothy's eyes flicked to her daughter, hoping, praying for even the smallest word of defense. But Derasia lowered her gaze, saying nothing. Dorothy forced a smile and nodded. "Of course, I understand." She ate in silence, each bite turning to ash in her mouth. When the plates were cleared, she rose and washed the dishes alone, while her daughter and son-in-law chatted in the living room about remodeling their kitchen. Her famous cornbread, the bread that had filled two growing children's stomachs on nights when there was nothing else, sat untouched in the middle of the table. That night, as Dorothy folded the knitted baby blankets back into her worn suitcase, her heart felt heavier than the bag in her hands. For the first time, she wondered if there was still a place for her in the very family she had broken her back to create. On the last morning, as Dorothy folded the baby blankets back into her worn suitcase, little Jordan burst into the room. "Grandma Dorothy, are you coming to live with us?" Dorothy's hands froze on the fabric. She bent down, pulling him close, breathing in the sweet scent of childhood she had once known so well. "No, baby," she whispered, kissing his forehead. "Why not?" "I like when you read me stories." Before she could answer, Duresh's shadow filled the doorway. "Jordan, go play. Grandma Dorothy has to catch her bus." The boy's small footsteps echoed down the hall, leaving Dorothy's heart aching in the silence. The drive to the bus station was heavy with words unsaid. Duretia started sentences, then let them trail off. Dorothy kept her eyes on the window, watching houses roll past. Neat lawns, fresh paint, children's bicycles lying carelessly in driveways. A world her sacrifices had made possible, yet one that no longer seemed to have space for her. Finally, as they pulled into the station, Duretia spoke. "Mom, I hope you understand. David and I are trying to build something here. We have to be careful about appearances, about the image we project in this neighborhood." Dorothy turned, her tired eyes searching her daughter's face. She forced a smile. "I understand, baby. I only want what's best for you and the children. Derasia hesitated, then added softly, almost as if offering a consolation prize. Maybe next time you visit, we could go shopping together. Get you some updated clothes. Maybe a different look. Dorothy nodded, though the words cut deeper than knives. She opened the door, her old handbag clutched tightly against her chest. As the bus pulled away, Dorothy pressed her forehead against the cool glass. In the reflection, she saw not the strong woman who had scrubbed floors and washed dishes to build a future, but a tired mother fading into the background of her children's new lives. Her grandson's voice echoed in her memory. "Grandma Dorothy, are you coming to live with us?" For the first time, she admitted the truth to herself. She no longer belonged. Dorothy picked up her small suitcase and stepped out of the car. "Maybe so, baby. Maybe so." As the bus rumbled out of Charlotte, she stared through the smudged glass at rows of bright houses and tidy lawns. Her daughter's world now. A world where Dorothy no longer seemed to fit. With every mile, the truth pressed heavier on her chest. She was being written out of their lives, one polite smile, one awkward silence, one maybe next time at a time. Back home, her own world shrank. The arthritis in her fingers stiffened until holding a broom or scrubbing a pan felt like punishment. When she slipped one winter morning and cracked her hip, the hospital job let her go. The night cleaning shift, the one no one wanted, became her only income. It barely stretched far enough for rent and bread, sometimes not even both. Her apartment mirrored her body's decline. The radiator clanked and groaned, but rarely produced heat. Water stains spread across the ceiling, plaster flaking like old skin. Pipes leaked under the sink. The air smelled faintly of mildew, and outside, the neighborhood she once trusted turned sharp and dangerous after dark. So Dorothy stayed inside. Her evenings blurred into nights, her nights into mornings. A small TV flickered in the corner, more company than family. She tried to keep her children close with phone calls. At first there was warmth, Jamar telling her about new promotions, Deracia about the children's school plays. But as months turned into years, the calls thinned. Jamar's voice was always rushed, clipped, promising to call back soon. Derasia's updates were shorter, her tone polite but distracted, as if Dorothy were an obligation squeezed between errands. Dorothy would sit with the receiver in her hand long after the line had gone quiet, whispering to herself as if the conversation hadn't ended. Mrs. Malavy, her neighbor across the hall, noticed Dorothy's declining condition. "Honey, you don't look good. When's the last time you talked to your children?" Dorothy forced a small smile, clutching the edge of her doorframe for balance. "Oh, they're busy, you know. Work, the kids, life." Mrs. Malavy frowned. "Well, you need to let them know you can't do all this alone. You need help." Dorothy nodded, but the words lodged in her throat. She didn't want to be a burden. She never had. For decades, she had been the one who carried others, scrubbing floors, working nights, sacrificing so her children could rise higher. How could she now call them and say, "I can't stand without pain. I can't cook without shaking. I can't live alone anymore"? That night, Dorothy sat at her small kitchen table with the stack of photographs and letters spread before her. She touched each picture gently, as if stroking her grandchildren's cheeks through the glossy paper. The silence of the apartment pressed in around her, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Christmas lights twinkled faintly from a distant window across the courtyard. She remembered years when her own children had begged for lights, when she had strung cheap tinsel around their tiny apartment just to see them smile. Her chest ached, not from sickness alone, but from the weight of remembering. For the first time, Dorothy wondered if her children even thought of her when they said grace at their holiday tables, or if she had become just another shadow in their past, tucked away like the letters in her shoebox. Your children? They're busy, Mrs. Mallaby. They got important lives now. Too busy for their mama. That ain't right, Dorothy. That ain't right at all. But Dorothy always defended them. They worked hard to get where they are. I don't want to be a burden on their success. In early 2016, Dorothy's health took a serious turn. She began having chest pains and shortness of breath. She couldn't miss work for doctor's visits, so she tried to manage the symptoms with over-the-counter medications and prayer. One night, while cleaning an office building downtown, Dorothy collapsed. The security guard found her unconscious in a supply closet and called an ambulance. She spent 3 days in the hospital where doctors told her she'd had a mild heart attack and her blood pressure was dangerously high. The hospital's social worker helped her apply for Medicare and food stamps, resources Dorothy had been too proud to seek before. The forms required emergency contact information, and Dorothy hesitated before writing down Jamar and Disha's phone numbers. The hospital called both children. Jamar was in a meeting and told his assistant to send flowers. Disha was at Jordan's soccer game and promised to call back later. Dorothy was discharged with a list of her reduced hours at the cleaning job left her constantly choosing between rent, groceries, and the medication she was supposed to take. Pride kept her from asking her children for money. She told herself they had their own responsibilities, their own families to care for. But Mrs. Mallaby could see the truth. Some nights she would quietly slip a grocery bag onto Dorothy's kitchen counter, fresh vegetables, a carton of eggs, sometimes even a small roast. "Don't argue with me," she'd say with a wink. "I know what it's like to stretch $1 into 3 meals. Let me help." Dorothy's heart softened in those moments. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Not as a burden, not as someone who needed to be fixed to fit into a better life, just as Dorothy. Still, the absence of her children gnawed at her. Each time the phone rang, her heart leapt with hope, only to sink when it was a telemarketer or wrong number. On the rare occasions Jamar or Disha did call, the conversations felt rushed, perfunctory. "Love you, Ma," they'd say quickly before hanging up, but the words felt weightless. One Sunday evening, after sharing supper with Mrs. Mallaby, Dorothy sat in her armchair holding the photo album of her grandchildren. She whispered into the quiet room, "I just want to be remembered. That's all." The next day, on her way to work, her chest tightened again. This time, the pain did not pass.